Are the Oklahoma City Thunder the model for the Utah Jazz rebuild and reload? And is it one that is replicable? Next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Today, we dig into how the Thunder have rebuilt into the number 2 team in the Western Conference, and whether are they done? And is this a model the Utah Jazz can follow? The offense is a problem without Lauri Markkanen, and no Lauri Markkanen again tonight for the Jazz. Trends Monday is back. We'll look at those teams, the hottest teams in the last 2 weeks and 10 games around the NBA and how everyone's trending. As I mentioned, I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free. We are available on all podcasting apps as well as on YouTube. Free on all of them. Glad to have you with us. Thanks for being involved in the chat room and all that. And to the everydayers, you're the best. I appreciate you. All right, a few shout-outs to K Fresh, who sent me their Spotify Wrapped. I'm super appreciative, and evidently you're in awesome shape because the only things other than NBA podcasts you listen to were weightlifting podcasts. Mind Pump, Raw Fitness Truth is your number 1 podcast. Dude, I want you in a dark alley. If I'm in trouble, I need you. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate you tuning in, and thank you, K Fresh, for sending me your Spotify Wrapped. Today's show is brought to you by, I want to make sure I get this right. I think I got it right. Brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for your first deposit match up to $100. I want to share a funny one for all the everydayers and long-timers out there. So I had a friend the other day who watched Locked on Jazz for the first time ever. Not a huge NBA fan. And they're like, what's up with the but? Like, they just laughed at me. And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, we're adding, like, our audience is like 25% new every year, maybe even higher. And, yeah, so the backstory of those of you who don't know it is when we first did Locked on Jazz, which was like 2007, like 16 years ago, I had no production. I didn't know what we were doing. It was called something else, actually. And the joke was that I was my own production, my own sound, my own music. And so I did that. And I've done it for 16 straight years, and it has never stopped. All right, let's get to the Thunder. I'm just kind of laughing at, like, for those of you, we're all used to it, hopefully. And it just means there's a lot of new people every day who are like, what the hell is he doing? Are the Thunder the model? So what has become very, very clear if you're trying to build an NBA franchise to be a championship team is, and we talk about this a lot, you need a top 10, you need a top 20, and you need a top 50. They might have it. Shea is unquestionably a top 10 player in the NBA. He might be top 5. He's incredible. Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara, second-year player, is outstanding. He's not consistent enough, but he's well on his way to being a top 50. And Chet Holmgren might be a top 20. They may have done it already. So let's look at how they've done it and then whether or not it's replicable. Similar to the Jazz, they traded 2 players, Russell Westbrook and Paul George, and then they lost a bunch. So there's 2 ways for these franchises like Oklahoma City and Utah to be able to build their franchise up. One is you make trades. We did Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. And then you can trade your other pieces, but similar to the Thunder, like the Thunder actually ended up getting like almost nothing for Chris Paul. Chris Paul is a 2027 first-round pick from Denver at this point. They almost got nothing for him. we got a first-round pick protected from Mike Conley and a bunch of pieces. Like, that's the second round. Bojan didn't get us much other than space. So it's not that's similar. You got kind of your two key trades, your big dogs, and then you're not getting a lot out of these other pieces. You can fiddle around, and they have 10 more first-round draft picks coming to them over time. So we have the Rudy trade, we have the Donovan trade, and then they tanked for 3 years. They went 21 and 50, which we have not done yet. So their first year of the rebuild, they went 21 and 50. Their second year, they went 24 and 58. So for 2 years, they were just awful. And we have not touched into that ground yet. We went through a pain-free year one. And then last year, they were 40 and 42. So they went through, and now this year, they're 14 and 7. I think all of us would take this. Like, they've done it about as well as it can be done. All right, and how'd they do it? So let's look at their tanking or their losing, whatever you want to call it. For the 22 and 50 year, they got Josh Giddey, who honestly I don't think is going to be a part of anything here. His inability to shoot, his inability to defend, irrelevant of the news around him recently, and certainly I'm sure that's impacting him greatly. He's not closing games for them anymore. He's in his third year shooting 42% and 30% from three. He's a fabulous ball mover, fabulous, gets to every spot he wants to on the floor, does a lot of things, doesn't compliment Shea, doesn't compliment Jalen Williams. Like, I don't think he's a part of this. So their very first pick of the losing, I don't think it's going to turn out to be a part of it. It's too hard. He's 13 of 48 on catch and shoot threes, 27%. His pick and roll defense, isolation defense is considerably worse than everybody else on the team. His isolation offense is dreadful. His pick and roll offense is dreadful. Like, I just don't see it. So I think Giddey ends up not being a part of this. Their second tank was Chet Holmgren. He sits out his first year due to injury, and right now he is terrific. He's defending the most shots of anyone in the NBA inside 6 feet. He's shooting fairly well from three, though he's cooled off a little bit. There's everything to believe he's going to be terrific. He has 13 blocks in his last 3 games. He's challenging 10 shots inside 6 feet. He's holding people 10% below average as a rookie or a first-year player. And then last year, they go 40 and 42, and they got the 10th pick of the draft. They got Cason Wallace, who is turning out to be outstanding. I loved him. He's shooting lights out. So right now, we'll see how Cason Wallace fits. The fact is, truthfully, about these rebuilds, you need a top 10 if you're going to win it. You need a top 10, a top 20, and a top 50. And every other piece, I don't want to say it's interchangeable, but it's what fits those 3 personnel pieces. Like, Danny, when he was in Boston, held on to Marcus Smart, held on to Kendrick Perkins for a really long time. He clearly believed those players complemented his 10, his 20, and his 50. And in Danny's championship team, the 10 was Garnett, the 20 was Paul Pierce, and the 50 was Ray Allen, maybe even a little better. 1 on their roster, 2 acquired via trade. Prior to or post, the build. His second Boston team, Jason Tatum's the 10. Jaylen Brown's the 20, maybe. Probably not. Probably why they haven't quite won the title yet. So Shea is their key piece here. So they got Shea in the Paul George trade. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander was first-team All-NBA last year. I was talking to a longtime NBA coach this week who said to me, the guy's first-team All-NBA and still underrated. He's that good. He scored over 30 in 6 of his last 7 games. His last 15 games, he's shooting 57% and scoring 32 points a game. It's insane. So he's great. So that's the Paul George trade. Okay, so that's our Lauri Markkanen on the Donovan Mitchell trade. And the thing is that Lauri's a top 30 right now. And Shea's a top 5 or 10. That's a big difference. So can Lauri make the way. When Shea came to Oklahoma City, he wasn't that, but he's also 6'6", natural ball handler. He had shown signs. I think he was the 11th pick of the draft. Jalen Williams is their masterpiece. Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara, who got hot late in that draft, and Oklahoma City grabbed him, and give Sam Presti the credit. This is what we need Danny Ainge to do at some point here. Was the 12th pick of the 2022 draft. He should have won Rookie of the Year last year. He's out of Santa Clara. I think he played 3 years at Santa Clara. And he was the best rookie last year. His second half of the season last year is the dream of what you want your rookie to be. I'd love to sit here and say the second half of his season last year is what we would like to see out of Keyonte, but I think it's noticeable that Jalen last year in the second half of the season was like an old 21, not a young 20. 6'5", 195, perfect body, and he just went bananas in the second half of the season. We would like to see Keyonte have some sort of an uptick of that nature, but if you go from just, I can make it better, but let's just go February 1st. For Jalen Williams last year, his final 29 games of the year, he shoots 53% from the field, 42% from three, 87%, scores 17 points a game. My goodness. 50, 40, 87. Keyonte's not doing that this year. I don't think that's that kind of jump, but that is awesome. So they get Jalen Williams from the Paul George trade. All right, this is taking longer than I thought, so let's pause and build out where they are, what their other pieces are here in a second, and then we'll talk about our offensive struggles. But it's an interesting model to look at, and you can see where the Jazz can piece it together, and I'll continue on that. We're just getting started, and we'll continue to have more of that for you. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross and in Logan. The Chevy lineup of cars and trucks, it's Americana. The Murdoch's 80-plus years in Utah with the no-regrets approach to making sure that you have an absolutely outstanding experience when you're at Murdoch Chevy. The Silverado and the Colorado are the truck line. The Silverado is the big poobah, absolutely unbelievable ride. Feels like you're sitting in a lazy boy chair, feeling like you're on top of the world, just killing it. And the Colorado is the zippy, fun truck. The SUV lineup has become better and better. The Tahoe and the Suburban we know well, but now you've got the Trax, the Trailblazer, and the Blazer to go along with the Equinox. It's all over at Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross and in Logan. If you're going to go to grab a Chevy, let's do it with Murdoch, and email me first at dlock09@gmail.com to get your VIP experience over at Murdoch Chevy. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for your first deposit match up to $100 at prizepicks.com/lockedon. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Just choose more or less. Tonight, you got Monday Night Football you can get involved in, plus the Jazz game. You can do both because that's something that Prize Picks has made possible. All sorts of fun with that. They even have the reboot policy. So if your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return, the player's rebooted. So grab it. Prize Picks. It's America's largest daily fantasy sports platform. Easiest and most exciting way to play, DFS. And you can get involved tonight. Ton of NBA games as well. You can do all NBA if you want to. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for your first deposit match. It is Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. All right, this is taking a little longer than I thought. I was going to be able to do that quickly. Okay, so 10, 20, and 50. They got their 10 in the Paul George trade. Can the Jazz replicate that? I don't know if Lauri can become a top 10 player. Like, he just right now does not have the dribble skill set, isolation skill set to be able to do that. That's part of the rest of the season the most important things are when he gets healthy, can he do that? Number two, they got their top 20 player probably in Chet Holmgren by getting the number 2 pick of the draft. Okay? And their third piece is Jalen Williams, who they got as part of the Paul George trade. I think he's that good. I think he's great. I mean, what he did in the second half of the season, we were just talking about 17 points, 53% shooting, 42% from three, is incredible. And he was just incredible against the Warriors the other night. So when you start to look at, that's their three pieces. They may have their, as Rylan Stiles of Locked On Thunder calls it, their OK three already. And they got it out of the losing for the draft for Chet. The Paul George trade has yielded the other two. They actually have nothing to speak of at this moment for the Russell Westbrook trade. They got Chris Paul, and they traded him for another pick. Their 2021 pick they got in the Russell Westbrook trade, they ended up trading to Houston for 2 picks. It became Alfred Şengün, and then I don't believe either of those 2 picks conveyed to them. So they actually got nothing. They have Houston's 2024 first-round pick, a pick swap in 2025 that's top 20 protected, and a 2026 first-round pick from Houston. Houston's going to be about 500 from here on. For Paul George, they got Trey Mann, who is their 2021 pick. I don't think he'll be a part of it. Jalen Williams, Shea, they have a 2023 pick that ended up back with Miami. They now have a 2024, 2025, and 2026. What's interesting to me about this that I think is important for the Jazz, can the Jazz replicate it? Okay, the whole thing is getting Shea. That's why they're 14-7. He's like the MVP of the league right now. Or close. But what I do think is interesting is when we think about this, like so far the Jazz for the Gobert trade have Walker. Right? And Keyonte George. And for the Donovan Mitchell trade, right now we have Ochai Agbaji and Lauri Markkanen. Okay? And then from tanking or losing, whatever way you want to call it, we have Taylor Hendricks. So that's our, like, pieces right now. And if you look at the comparable, Josh Giddey was the first pick for Oklahoma City. I don't think he's going to be a part of it. And that's actually going to be the key thing about all this, is the amount of guys that actually don't make it. Trey Mann, 2021 first-round pick, part of the Paul George trade. I don't think he makes it as a part of this. They have hit in their talent acquisition windows. And I think this is what you have to look at from a Jazz standpoint of how long is it going to take us. So their talent acquisition windows, their first one was the trades. And that's where they got Shea and we got Lauri. We actually also got Walker and Agbaji. So in our first acquisition window, we didn't get the top 10 player, but we might have gotten more players, right? Because we got Walker and Agbaji, but we'll see. Maybe Agbaji turns out like Trey Mann or Josh Giddey. Maybe Walker turns out like Trey Mann and Josh Giddey. Like, just because they're yours doesn't mean they have to be a part of it. But that was their first foray, was the trades of 2021. That's their first acquisition window. Their second acquisition window was the draft of 2021. And that's where they got Josh Giddey, and they may have gotten a big, huge goose, and they did the trade, the Şengün trade, and got none of those picks conveyed, and they got Trey Mann. They may have gotten a big, huge goose egg in their second transition window, and yet they're the model franchise. That's what I'm trying to get to here. Their 2022 is their next draft, and they get Chet Holmgren. They hit it. And they get Jalen Williams with the pick from the Paul George trade. Bam. They nailed it. They don't play free agency. They don't play trades other than little acquisitions, interchangeable pieces. Rylan Stiles did a fun one today where he talked about a car, and then he had all little pieces like some of these guys are the air conditioning, some of the automatic windows. But like the engine is Shea. And in the 2023 window, they've added Cason Wallace. We'll see. He might turn out to be really good. He'll probably replace Josh Giddey. And now we'll see what their next acquisition windows are. From the Jazz standpoint, in our very first acquisition window, we walked with Walker, Agbaji, and Lauri, which is when they walked with Shea. Their second acquisition window, we walked with Taylor, Keyonte, and we'll see about Bryce. They left with Josh Giddey and Trey Mann. They may have zeroed on that one. Didn't feel like it for a while, but I think they might have. In 2012, or 2022, excuse me, they went down, had the second pick of the draft, got Chet Holmgren. Boy, could we ever love to get the second pick of the draft and get a Chet Holmgren this year. Comparable. And then they used the pick from the Paul George trade for Jalen Williams. That would be us using, in 2025, similar timetable, Minnesota or Cleveland's pick to get our Jalen Williams. And in 2023, they got Cason Wallace. We'll see. I like him. That will be us with pick swaps and the rest. Very similar. You got to find your 10, your 20, and your 50. They've done it really fast. And they did it all because the 2022 draft, they may have gotten two of their guys in their third acquisition window. We're really in our third this year, maybe our second. So I don't know if that tied together the way I wanted it to. My point is that they've done it. They may have their OK three, a 10, a 20, and a 50. It's the model. Can we replicate it? Maybe. Lauri's not Shea is going to be the first hurdle for us. But if you look at when they acquired it in their acquisition windows, we're not behind. We got to find a Shea. We got to find a Chet. We got to find a Jalen. We probably have our 20 or our 30 in Lauri. We got to find these next guys. And Jalen and Chet are good early. Chet's in his first year. Jalen's in his second. Hard to win a lot, the whole thing, but they got their pieces. And again, they got him in their third acquisition window, which would really be our draft this year. It may take us that's incredible. It may take us to the fourth acquisition window, which would be when we suddenly are playing with Cleveland, Minnesota, and our picks, and a better draft. But they did it. They got their first piece in the trade and their next two pieces in the third acquisition window. And to some extent, this is what you're doing. You're trying to get three pieces out of all this. And then you just start playing with your air conditioning, your power windows, and your power seats, and your other pieces of the car. So that's why it's a model. Okay, offense is a real problem for us right now in Trends Monday as we continue here on Locked On Jazz, coming up for you as we continue. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book of Locked On. It is also the largest sports book, most popular sports book in North America, which makes it convenient and easy for everyone to use. It's a great app, works very, very easily. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to get your latest and best and get the $150 bonus bets. Big night of NBA on the docket for you. NFL as well tonight with Miami, which is super fun. Or maybe that's later. No. Tonight, I think, is Packers-Giants. Packers are a 6-point favorite. NBA tonight, huge docket of games. If you're just looking for your money line bet, the biggest line out there is Philadelphia is an 11.5-point favorite over Washington, and the Thunder have the biggest line of the night, a 12-point favorite over the Jazz, and the Bucks are 11.5 over the Bulls. And the Clippers are 13 over Portland. So there's some big lines tonight right there if you're trying to get your $150 of bonus bets. Don't bet against the Jazz. That's no fun. Then what are you rooting for? It's all over at FanDuel.com/locked on. Thanks so much for Locked On your first listen of the day. I really, really, really appreciate you every day. All right. We're having a really hard time scoring. Which, without Lauri is probably not the biggest surprise in the world. But it's the other night against Clippers was a 104 offensive rating. League average is like a 112 right now, 113. We're 10 points below league average offensively. It's just impossible. Just super impossible. The league average, the best offense in the league right now is Indiana at 123. Golden State is now at 114 as the league average. We've been below 105 in 5 of our last 7 games. So we really, really, really need Lauri out there. And it's taxing everyone else when Lauri's not out there and pushing them kind of beyond where they're comfortable. And frankly, like Jordan just hasn't shown the consistency to be a primary night in and night out scorer. I also am just not sure that's who he is. Like, I'm not sure that's a fair item. The problem really gets to be like, what do we run? Like, what do we do offensively? When Lauri's not on the floor, we're a 105.9 offense. So that's why we're below 105 in all these games, which is in the 8th percentile of all offenses. So what can we do? Well, the first thing is that when we play with Lauri, we run off-ball screens. The offense is predicated on spread out, off-ball screens, guys moving around. That becomes Simone Fontecchio. Like, I don't think that's really going to be the answer, right? And Simone, since he started, is average shooting 37% and 33% from 3 because that's just too much. So the next answer for Will is to go back to a really heavy pick and roll game, which we did until the Clipper game. The Clipper game, we kind of bailed out of it. But here's the problem. If you look at the top 60 guards in the NBA that have run pick and roll this year, Keyonte ranks 60th and Talen ranks 58th. This isn't like that surprising. Like if you go look at who the other guys are, Shaedon Sharpe and Paolo Banchero and Killian Hayes and like young guards and Chris Paul, weirdly enough, are all in that group. So this is not like, oh my gosh, panic or anything like that. That's just kind of the reality is that, one, Keontae's run like the 14th most pick and rolls of any guard in the NBA at this point, which is just a crazy number considering how young and inexperienced he is. And the fact that, as we've talked about, he really has never played point guard in his entire life. He's run a lot of pick and roll. Let's not overplay this to the point where like he was the primary scorer. Primary scorers run pick and roll. And he hasn't run the 1,000 that Luka's run, but he is run about 500 so far this year. And of the top 60 pick and roll guards, I use 60 because it's 2 numbers, like he's not particularly good at it yet. Right? Like, and nor are like most young players. Like that's kind of the reality of what my point is. So I'm not going to go panic. Keontae's got to show some signs by the end of the year of more offensive efficiency. But yeah, like here's the bottom 7 guys in the NBA in pick and roll are Jalen Green, 3rd year, Killian Hayes, Shaedon Sharpe, Paolo Banchero, Talen Horton-Tucker, Jeremy Sohan, who's similar to Keyonte and trying to learn how to play point guard, and Keyonte George. And then the other 2 are Kyle Lowry and Chris Paul, who are just old, and Cade Cunningham, who's in his 2nd year. Like those are the lowest points per chance guards in the NBA. That's because that's the reality. Now, the fact that Jalen Brunson and DeJounte Murray are next, like that should, and Terry Rozier, that should be concerning a few of those teams. But for us, that's just the reality. So it's super hard for us to score right now. And I would say, like some of the blowout losses, I think just come down to like it's just you're banging your head against the wall time and time and time again right now. And frankly, you can run and execute and do all these things. It's not particularly like there's not really any good answers. The other one that's interesting is we are super slow into action. We're the slowest team in the league into action. We actually have run as many we're at 7.5 seconds before our first action, a little less. And that's the slowest in the league. But that, I think, is in relation to having Keyonte as a point guard trying to make sure he gets set. And we're a little bit better the quicker we are, frankly. If we can get into our actions, we're better. There's actually a funny fine line if you look at our data that basically says if we either get into an action or really slow it down, don't get caught in the middle. And that's kind of what Will Hardy's been trying to do with this team. But when we When we play over 7 seconds, we're at 1.10, and when we play under 7 seconds, we're at 1.1. So it's a little better if we're quicker. But if we're really quick, if we get into action in the first 5 to 7 seconds, we're 1.15. And if we drop down, we get down to about 1.08. It gets a lot slower. And 1.08 in a half court is not great. It's kind of what we just talked about. So there is something where we just are so young, so inexperienced, trying to do things right, trying to be structured. It slows us down. That's hard. We end up playing with less of a shot clock. These things are really, like, I just have great sympathy toward it, I guess is what I'm saying. There's just, like, no Lauri, no, your primary offensive player's not there. Jordan hasn't been back. The way you want to play is not available. You don't have the players to do it. You're now asking young guards to play pick and roll, which doesn't work in the NBA, and all of a sudden your offense is really struggling. Like, I get it. Like, I'm not sitting there thinking, like, wow, Will Hardy's really doesn't have anything to, like, no fault. Just learning. No fault. And I think it's super hard. All right, let's do Trends Monday. We look at this in two different ways over the years. We looked at the top 10 games, and then we looked at the most top 10 overall, and then we've looked at kind of last 2 weeks. So micro trend and super micro trend is the number one team in the NBA over the last 10 games is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Number 2 is Minnesota. Number 3 is Orlando. This is done by net rating. Number 4, Philadelphia. Number 5, the Clippers. Really felt like the Clippers had clicked in when we saw them. 5 teams struggling the most are Detroit, Utah, Washington, San Antonio, and Charlotte. Not huge surprises there. Memphis' turnaround. 5 best offenses over the last 10 games are Indiana, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is the 5th best offense. Orlando, interestingly enough, where everyone's talking about their defense and this and that, has the 6th best offense over the last 10 games. They're 8-2. And Atlanta has the 7th best offense, but one of the worst defenses. Teams that can't score right now over the last 10, Detroit, Utah, Memphis, Portland, and San Antonio. The separation is clear right now. 5 best defenses in the NBA, Minnesota, Lakers won themselves an NBA Cup. Clippers, Cavaliers have plugged back in, and the Thunder again. Rockets are the 6th best defense. Memphis is playing defense again. They're the 7th best. 5 worst defenses in the NBA, Washington, Atlanta, Charlotte, Indiana, Detroit. We're at 21st. Okay? Let's look at more recent trends. Last 2 weeks, which has not been a lot of games with all the play-in tournament. We're going to all have to play a ton of games now. The number 1 team in the NBA is Brooklyn. Number 2, Minnesota. Number 3, Boston. Number 4, Cleveland. Number 5, the Lakers. Dallas is 6. Bottom teams, Detroit, Utah, Atlanta, San Antonio, and Toronto. Interesting to see Toronto and Atlanta in there on the more micro trend. Best offenses, Boston, Indiana, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, New York. So OKC not there in the last 2 weeks. They're actually down to 19th offensively. Off teams that are struggling to score the most, Detroit, Utah, Portland, Toronto, San Antonio. And Phoenix. Interesting. Phoenix having a hard time scoring. Number 1 off defenses in the last 2 weeks, Minnesota, Cleveland, Lakers, Memphis, Portland, surprise, and Brooklyn. And then teams that are not defending at all. Miami is last in the last 2 weeks. Charlotte, Atlanta, New Orleans, Washington, and Indiana. Those are your trends. That is Locked On Jazz. For those on YouTube, hope you enjoyed the Oklahoma Prairie Landers today. We will be back Wednesday against the Knicks. Tickets are available at utahjazz.com. Make sure you go to Jazz Plus to get the Front Row podcast with Holly Rowe, both Ryan Smith, Will Hardy. She actually added a Lauri Markkanen episode now. All available for you as well. Have a great day. Thank you very much for tuning in to Locked On Jazz. We now send you to the first ever national 24/7 stream of Locked On Sports Today. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy our programming on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. If not, go grab it at Locked On Sports Today.